this is the trick that I learned so many years ago that has really helped me a lot. So I find the prophecies that deal with the abomination and the events, and then I just start backing up in those prophecies, and I try and put my finger on where I am today. I believe I've come to the conclusion that the events connected with things that are going to happen up until the second coming are actually clearly in the prophecies. When we start to put all these prophecies together, we're getting incredible detail on what's going on.
Dear Father in heaven, thank you so much that we can gather again. Thank you for our freedoms. Thank you for our privilege. We just ask that the Holy Spirit come, guide us into what we need to know. Keep us in thy care. Give us knowledge and give us insight into what we need to know. For we ask it in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. We've had some questions on what's going on in the world. You know, we've got Ukraine and Russia and Europe all upheaval, and then what's China doing? What's that going to turn into? And now we've got Canada and the United States at odds with each other. And so people are really wondering what's going on because they're trying to. Well, the other thing is, of course, the Middle East. There's always a fire going over there somewhere. So that the whole world, the whole world is it's losing its way, and that's becoming pretty obvious. So I thought maybe we'd spend just a little bit of time just to bring possibly a little bit more clarity on what's going on and where we can see where it's going. So the thing is, if we know what we're talking about, it's going to go a long ways toward people ultimately listening to us as far as our witness is concerned. And the thing about prophecy, of course, that's what we're dealing with. A lot of people don't want to deal with prophecy because how do you know who's right and who's wrong? And all the guys that have been predicting forever, they've been proven wrong. So we just leave prophecy alone. But prophecy is ultimately very, very important. I can't overemphasize how important it is, actually. And I guess that's why I've spent so much time in it, because I realize the importance of it. The Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, is a book of prophecy. In fact, it is the only book in the world that has been accurate for thousands of years on the prophecies. And prophecy was a huge benefit to ancient Israel. And so if we claim to be God's people today, then we should have the benefit of knowing what's coming in the future, because that benefit ancient Israel had. And had they remained faithful to their calling, they would be the center of worship in the world today. But because they didn't, and we know the rest of that story, they've been basically in captivity for the last 2,000 years or out of Israel, but now they're all coming back, and people are saying, well, that's a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. I would challenge that concept for several reasons, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about that tonight as well. So the first thing I want to deal with is what people miss is, especially, and I'm not going to talk about other faiths, I'm going to talk about Christianity for the most part. Israel, we know that they rejected Yeshua and the prophecies that forecasted his first coming. So there's really no point in talking or seeking an understanding of prophecy from the Jewish people or the Israelite people. That's kind of my position. is why would I go to somebody that rejected their own Messiah and the prophetic insights that they were given in their own Messiah? So I'm not gonna entertain listening to rabbis on prophecy. So first of all, the best teacher, the best New Testament teacher on prophecy would have been Yeshua. And that should be no surprise to us, as he was the Messiah himself. The prophetic promise that was in the New Testament, he was the personage of that promised one. So we're going to go to him, and this is what I see to be the absolute Achilles heel for any believers today, is they bypass Yeshua when they're looking at prophecy. And that's going to get us every time. And so I want to start with him, and that's going to get us in a few different places in the Bible. And he points us at exactly where to go in regard to his second coming. So let's start with Matthew 24. And I would really encourage any of us that are trying to share this with other people, which is what we should be doing, trying to share it with other people, start with the words of Yeshua. They're the springboard that goes everywhere that we need to go. And so I highly recommend using Yeshua when it comes to the time of the end. And we're gonna walk through, and I'm gonna show you step by step of what I believe to be the best route to go on prophecy. And not very many people do it this way, which is surprising, but not surprising at the same time. So Matthew 24, let's start with Matthew 24.
Matthew 24, verse 1. Then Yeshua went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him and to show him the buildings of the temple. And Yeshua said to them, do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another, that shall not be thrown down. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, his disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Okay, good. So we're just setting the stage here. So for anyone that you're talking to out there, I highly recommend you go right after these texts. Because most people are willing to look at the New Testament. They're willing to look at the words of Yeshua. And so we've got to take full advantage of that. So in the context of what's going on, they're walking through the temple, everything's really fancy. This is right at the time of Passover. There's lots of people there. Everyone's having a great time. They got all the fancy things going on at the temple, all the decorations, and so they're walking around, making sure Yeshua notices all this stuff, all this fancy stuff at the temple, and he says, "Well, I got some bad news for you guys. This place is going to be totally reduced to nothing." And so they're kind of like, what in the world is he talking about? And so as they're going up to the Mount of Olives, I can just see them all discussing, what was Yeshua talking about back there? Did you guys hear what Yeshua said? This place is going to be reduced to nothing. All the stones are going to be thrown down. This can't be anything other than the second coming. In fact, we've read about this in the Old Testament. In Jeremiah it talks about, Isaiah talks about, Ezekiel talks about this. All this great disaster is going to happen at the end of the world. And so it's not like this is a new thought. They knew that things were going to get bad at some point. And they say, is this what you're talking about? That when you come back, it's going to be, everything's going to be laid to ruins? And then let's go over to Mark, because Mark 13. And Mark 13 and Matthew 24 are almost carbon copies. Not much difference, but let's just have a look at that here.
And as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples saith unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. And Yeshua answering said unto him, Seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives over against the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign when all these things shall be fulfilled?
Yeah, now this gives a little more information that's kind of interesting. He's got 12 disciples. They're all up there on the Mount of Olives. They were in the temple, then they came up there. But just 4 of the 12 are talking to him. It's like these guys had the inside track, and it was agreed upon by the 12 that let's get Peter, James, John, and Andrew to go talk to him, because he'll tell them. He'll explain it to them. And I can't be sure on that, but he's not talking to all of them. It says they came privately. So either James, John, Peter, and Andrew kind of got together and said, hey, let's corner Yeshua, because they were quite close to him, it seems. Let's corner Yeshua and find out exactly what he was talking about. So that's right there. And then verse 4, I want to look at verse 4 here. It says, Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when all these things will be fulfilled? Okay, so we're just going to take this apart piece by piece, and we're going to go over to Luke 21 now. Now those two are basically the same. We just get a little more information about who came to him to ask the questions. But in Luke, we can see Luke records this a little differently. Now, it's interesting that Luke was not there. He's an add-on, if you will. The record of Luke, he's not one of the disciples. He got this information from probably the disciples. So in Matthew, he was one of the disciples, but it's interesting that Matthew wasn't there when Yeshua revealed it. So Matthew wasn't there, Mark wasn't there. They may have been in the group, but they were not there. Mark probably wasn't one of the guys that was one of the disciples. So Mark may not have been one of the disciples. He got it from, it's believed to be Peter. So Mark is probably a pretty close contact because he got it from Peter, and Peter was one of the ones asking the questions. Matthew would have got it probably from Peter, James, John, or Andrew. So it's secondhand on both of those counts, and Luke would have been at least secondhand as well. But it's interesting that Luke has more details than Matthew and Mark, and that's where it becomes very interesting, because I don't believe Luke made things up, the additions in his gospel, but he just records a little more of the information. So let's start with, let's see, Luke 21, starting at verse 5 through 7.
Some of his disciples began talking about the majestic stonework of the temple and the memorial decorations on the walls. But Yeshua said, The time is coming when all these things will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of another. Teacher, they asked, when will all this happen? What sign will show us that these things are about to take place?
Okay, so this is a little bit different in that it says, that last part is kind of important. And what sign will there be when these things are about to take place? In other words, we want some warning. And that's what everyone's asking. You know, I get people calling and emailing. It's like, how much time do we have? It's like, how much time do we have until what? That's my question. And of course, I know what they're asking. How much time do we have until Yeshua returns? But that's not the right question. And I'm just going to be rather blunt here. But the right question is how much time do we have until all hell breaks loose? That's the right question. Because when that happens, it's all downhill. If there was any time for preparation, it's before that time period. So I believe what Luke was asking was, we want some warning prior to your coming, because it's going to be bad. There's going to be a time of trouble, number one, such as there never was since there was a nation. But there's also going to be a time of trouble that leads up until that time. So there's really, in actual fact, there's two times of trouble. We're going to get there, but in Matthew, in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and Luke, it talks about a time of trouble such as there never was since there was a nation. When we go back to Daniel, and that's what Yeshua was quoting verbatim right out of Daniel, that time period does not happen until the Abomination of Desolation comes on stage. And so, but there's a time that leads up to that. So that's what we could call a pre-time of trouble, which is a horrible time of trouble, but the great time of trouble is right at the end. So Luke really is saying, you know, we want warning before you get here. And that's really what we should all be asking for, is not so much when is Yeshua coming back, but when are things going to take a downhill spiral, in that there will be no time or opportunity for preparation for the time of the end once this hits. That's really the right question that we should be asking. And that's really, I believe, why they asked this question in the way they did. So now we get to verse 8. So let's stay in Luke chapter 21, verse 8.
And he said, Take heed ye not be deceived, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and the time draweth near. Go ye not therefore after them.
Okay. So Yeshua's asked a question. What's the sign of your coming, the end of the age? When are these things about to take place? Great questions. Those are the questions we should be asking today. I believe, if we're followers of Yeshua, these guys, that time period did not pertain to those guys. And I am so glad they asked the question, because if they didn't ask the question, we wouldn't have the answer. We have the answer in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. So we've got the answer to the question they were asking that we should all be asking. What's the sign of your coming in the end of the age? And so he unpacks. The very first thing he says is take heed. In other words, just be aware that you are not deceived. For many will come in my name saying, I am he, the time is drawn near, therefore do not go after them. There's 3 points that we need to make in this one verse alone. The first point is, don't be deceived. So the very first thing Yeshua says regarding the time of the end is deception is going to be rampant. Not in the world. I'm not going to be deceived by some East Indian guru. It's not going to happen. He's talking to his followers. So let's bring this home, shall we? So he's talking to his followers that are followers of the word and followers of teachers of the word. And he said, the very most important thing at the time of the end is that you're not deceived. Now I'm going to tell you how you're going to be deceived, or the possible method that you're going to be deceived. And so he tells us exactly the challenge that we have. For many will come in my name, saying, I am he. Now, most Christians, and I know you guys for the most part, I think you understand this, but most Christians think that he's referring to somebody that's coming as Jesus or Yeshua. But that's not what he's saying here at all. It's not even remotely what he's saying. What he's saying here is, many are going to come in my name. Now, let me ask the question. Was Yeshua, and I know this is disputed out there in the world, so I might get the wrong answer here, but I'm going to ask the question anyways. Was Yeshua claiming to be the Father?
No.
He was claiming to be the Son. And if we go back into the Old Testament, we can see, as the New Testament writers, primarily in the book of Hebrews, it's beautiful in Hebrews, there's places in the Old Testament where there's a conversation going on, and it's mostly in the Psalms. There's a conversation going on between the Father and the Son. There's definitely two entities. And the conversations are going back and forth in the Psalms. And it's brought out in the book of Hebrews. The first few chapters of the book of Hebrews, we see conversations between the Father and the Son. Today I have begotten you, you have become my son. I'm going to give you the throne of David. All these promises the Father's making to the Son. And so there's definitely two entities. So Yeshua himself knows how to use the term, and he uses it himself. He says, many are going to come in my name. He said himself in the book of John, he said, I have come in my Father's name. So the question is, was he claiming to be the Father? No. He was claiming to come as a representative of the Father. So when he said, I've come in my Father's name, he wasn't saying that I'm the Father, but I come as a representative of the Father. So that's how he uses the term. So now when we see how he uses the term here, he says, many are going to come in my name. They're not coming claiming to be Jesus or Yeshua. They're claiming to be teachers. They're claiming to be teachers of the word of Yeshua. That's what he says. And it's very obvious in Luke, because we can see here, they're saying that they're going to come in my name saying that I am he. So they're claiming that Yeshua was or is the Messiah, and that the time has drawn near. So my question is, what time are they talking about that's drawn near? So these teachers are saying the time is drawn near. What time? And I'm looking for an answer here. What time are they saying that has drawn near?
Time of the end.
I want to be more specific. That's the right question, but not specific enough.
Time of
Pardon me?
time of trouble.
Okay, I want to be more specific. What was the question? What is the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So let's be...
So his next coming.
Pardon me?
So his second coming.
Exactly. Exactly. This is very important because it helps us understand what Yeshua is talking about. He obviously can't be talking about people that are claiming to be Yeshua, because they wouldn't say that the time is drawn near. They would say, I'm here. So it's obviously talking about people that are teaching in the name of Yeshua. That's what his name was. There was no confusion about what his name was back then. His name was not Jesus. We are not talking about people that are teaching in the name of Jesus. We're talking about people that are preaching in his name. And I say this so often, I'm sure some of you have heard me say this. If someone was in the crowd and Yeshua was, 10, 15, 20 feet away and they wanted to get his attention, they would have said Yeshua or some form of that name. They wouldn't have called out Jesus. He would not have responded because that wasn't his name. He knew what his name was and he knew what his name wasn't. So when he said to the disciples, many are going to come teaching or in my name, it was his name, not some other name. And so in the time of the end, and this is what people have a hard time grasping, it's not people that are teaching in the name of Jesus that are going to lead people astray, God's people astray. It's people that are teaching in the name of Yeshua or Yahushua, however you want to pronounce it. I'm not stuck on the pronunciation, but I am stuck on the Hebrew nature of his name. That was what his name was. And so I'm not going to be deceived by somebody that teaches in the name of Jesus. It's not going to happen. My Messiah was given a name by the Father, given to Gabriel. Make sure, Gabriel, when you talk to Mary and Joseph, that they have this name, because this name means Yahweh is salvation, or Jehovah is salvation. It's very important. It was important to the Father. It was important to Gabriel to carry out the wish of the Father to give him a name. And Mary and Joseph followed that and gave him that name. And I'm sure they never called him by the name Jesus. I'm pretty sure of that. And so we should be here at the time of the end, because the restoration of all things is taking place. We should be wanting to get back to the basics. And so we need to know who our Messiah is, and we need to teach in his name, and we need to help others understand who the real Messiah is. But my point here that we can't miss is the people that Yeshua tells that are going to deceive many are teaching in the name of Yeshua. Now, when I watch a video and somebody is teaching in the name of Jesus, I really tear that video apart. Because I have people, oh, you need to watch that video. As soon as the name Jesus comes out of their mouth, all my antennas are just straight up. I listen to every word super carefully that they're saying, because I respect somebody when they say, I need to listen to this guy. There may be things that I can learn. No question about it. But as far as taking everything that they say to be gospel, nope, sorry, not going to do that. I'm very critical of that. And I'm even more critical when people give me a teaching by somebody that uses his name Yeshua, Yahushua, or Joshua, however you want to say it. I'm even more critical because they're the ones that Yeshua warned me specifically about. Okay, I cannot overemphasize that point. So I could give you a whole list of people that I'm extremely wary of that are in the Hebrew Roots movement. And the list is long, let me assure you, that I'm super critical of their teachings. And I wasn't going to do this, but I think it's really important. I think it's really important that I do this. So let's go back to the book of Jeremiah, shall we? Chapter 20 of Jeremiah. And there's lots of examples, but we'll just take this one example. Now Pashur, chapter 20, Jeremiah, verse 1. Now Pashur, the son of Immer, the priest, who was also chief governor in the house of Jehovah, heard that Jeremiah prophesied these things. Then Pashur struck Jeremiah the prophet and put him in stocks that were in the high gate of Benjamin, which was by the house of Jehovah. And it happened on the next day that Pashur brought Jeremiah out of the stocks. Then Jeremiah said to him, the Lord has not called your name Pashur, but Magor Misabib. And thus says Jehovah, behold, I will make you a terror to yourself and to all your friends, and they shall fall by the sword of their enemies. So here, just one example, but Jeremiah faced many examples where he was not only persecuted, he was put in a bad light by all the teachers in Israel. This is just one example. Now this guy is a priest, and he and was also the chief governor in the house of the Lord. So he was one of the high up people. So I'm just going to make a comparison here. I don't want any names out here. We can talk about that, but I don't want to record any names here. But if you were to take God's people today, I believe God's people really, if you want to make a comparison to the house of Israel, is the Messianic movement. They're the people that try and do what they can to adhere to the biblical teachings as close as possible. They keep the feast, they keep the Sabbath, they eat the right food, they do all these things to try and keep, and I believe they're grafted into the household of faith, which is the house of Israel. So they would be really the household of Israel. Now, I find it very interesting. I propose that we are repeating the ancient history of ancient Israel almost to the letter amongst God's people today, which I believe to be the Messianic movement, or those that adhere to biblical teachings as close as possible. So if we're repeating the history, could we possibly be repeating the history as far as how God was leading those people and the rejection of the teachings of the day, whether it was Jeremiah's day, whether it was the time of Yeshua? We see history being repeated. Now here's my question. Who would be one of the top teachers in the Messianic movement today? And I don't want any names here, but you've all know somebody that would be referred to as one of the top teachers or a very popular teacher amongst the Messianic movement. Now, would it be right for me to say this next thing? Would it be right or not? Well, I'm going to say it anyways because it's not my words, it's Yeshua's words. He said that those that come in my name, teaching in my name, are going to deceive many. So who do you know in the Messianic movement that's using Yeshua's name, Yeshua or Yahushua, or however you want to say it? It's not Jesus. I'm not talking about people teaching in that name. I'm talking about people teaching in his Hebrew name. Who do you know that you could say for certainty is a false prophet? Who do you know for certainty that would fall under what Yeshua said, that those in the time of the end, which is the time that he was referring to, in the time of the end, the most important thing is there's going to be teachers that are coming in my name and they're going to lead many people astray. So I'm asking, who do you know out there? And I would recommend that you just make your own little list of who those people are. And the reason why I'm pushing this is because your list may not be very long.
They wear black.
They wear what?
Black.
Oh,
They wear black
wow.
all the time.
You mean
One of
he
them.
wears black?
Yeah, he wears black. One of them.
Okay, I'm doing this for a reason. Is that he said, many will come in my name and they will deceive many. So our list should be fairly long of those that we could say are false prophesying. If we're following Yeshua and his word, our list should be long.
Yeah, anybody teaching the millennium is on earth falls into that category, right?
I would absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, that's right.
Because they're not following the very words of Yeshua when they teach that. And to me, that's like a red flag right there. If they're teaching the millennium on earth, they're one of these guys. Because that teaching alone is calculated not by the people that are teaching it. I want to be clear on that. They don't understand. It's false. But that doctrine has been created, I believe, in the pit of hell to lead us to destruction. And I'm being kind of frank because I think I need to be. We've got to realize the seriousness of the deception that is out there. I'm going to get some emails like, who do you think you are? Well, I'm just a teacher. I'm a follower of Yeshua. And I go by the words of Yeshua, and I make them first and foremost when it comes to prophecy. And I'm sorry if people don't like that, but he is my go-to when it comes to prophecy. And I believe that's why, for the most part, the Messianic teachers out there, many of them, are running all over the Bible and looking in the wrong places to figure out what's going on in the world. If we made Yeshua our go-to, he tells us where to look. And so when he was asked the specific question of what is the sign of your coming in the end of the age, he didn't go to Jeremiah. He didn't go to Isaiah. He didn't go to Ezekiel. He went to Daniel. Why are we going everywhere except where Yeshua points us? I don't get it.
Yeah. And another big one that's false out there that a lot of them are teaching is this Yeshua, we still got to do sacrifices, and that temple is a good thing and all that nonsense.
Right.
Well, that's really going on right now.
And do you know why? Because people are going to Jeremiah and Ezekiel, primarily those two books, and mostly Ezekiel, and that's why they're. But Yeshua, when the disciples asked about, what is the sign of your coming in the end of the age, it was not, oh well, by the way, you got to have a temple for me when I come back. That he didn't say anything like that. That was not in the program. And it becomes very clear. And anyways, so let's not get hung up there. If anyone has any questions on any of that we just covered, no problem. I don't mind spending some time and going through that. But let's just move a little bit forward here.
Well, the rapture would come into that too, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. The rapture comes into that too.
Okay.
The rapture, Yeshua never taught anything about a rapture. We're taking texts out of context, out of their original setting to get to that. And it's not what he taught. Absolutely. The rapture is another deception that's out there. And even people within the Messianic movement are teaching rapture concepts. And I'm just going like, come on, you guys. I thought you came out of that. And but they are teaching that. And I could name some, but I won't name some. I don't want to, one day I might name some of these people right online. But I'm saying what they're teaching. That should be good enough. When somebody's still teaching rapture, and the rapture is a taking people out before the time of the end, that's wrong. That's false, and that's just a sign that somebody is teaching falsehood. So we covered that, and you can go back to Matthew and Mark and look at that again, and. So we're told by Yeshua, therefore do not go after them. So when we recognize somebody is teaching one of these strange doctrines, then Yeshua says don't go after them. And that to me, that's really the end of my rope with those people. When I see the millennium on earth, I move on. Rapture, I move on. Those two things are non-negotiable.
Sacrificing.
And when people are talking about a sacrifice system that we're going to be running to Jerusalem and, or we're going to be teaching people how to sacrifice, those three things, I'm moving on. I rarely will look at another thing that somebody's teaching if they're holding on to that. Because those are calculated doctrines that are going to lead people to the wrong place at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So those are main teachings, and those teachings are alive and well in the Messianic movement.
For sure.
And so I believe those are the ones that Yeshua was warning us about. Because we're not going to be deceived by somebody, some Sunday keeper. It's, we claim to be his followers, just like the disciples. I'm not going to be deceived by a Sunday keeper or somebody that keeps Christmas and Easter and eats everything that they want to eat out there. Apparently Yeshua cleansed all food. So, well, I guess we can turn into cannibals too, if we get hungry enough. Where do you stop? By the way, and we know this, they did that when they're being sieged. They ate their own children. And, we never want to say we're outside of falling because we're all human, and we never know what we're going to do until we get into the situation. But anyways, leave that behind. Okay, so we want to pick it up in Luke again. So this is where Luke adds some information. So I want to go back to Matthew first, because I want to show Matthew wasn't as detailed as Luke is. For whatever reason, Luke, we're told, was a physician, and maybe that's why he paid attention to detail. A good physician would pay close attention to detail, and he does that. So let's go back to Matthew 24, verse 4 and 5. I'll just read them, pick up the context here. And Yeshua answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ.'" So Yeshua is the Messiah. We all know that. He says they will deceive many. "And you will hear of wars, rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." Very interesting. So he says these things are going to happen, but the end is not yet. In other words, the end is still down the road. Now this goes back to their question. When are these things going to happen? And what is the sign of your coming? So what he's doing, he's giving a sign of his coming. Well, the sign of his coming that's going to start the end time events, he says, is going to be war. Wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled, for all these things must come to pass first. Now, we know, and I've been told, well, there's been wars and rumors of wars, from the beginning of time, which is true. There's always been wars somewhere. Somebody's fighting somewhere on the planet. No question about it. But he is talking about a specific war, not just any old war. And it's very clear, and I'm going to try and show what that war is. So we want to help people understand the war. And so he says the time is not, or the end is not yet. Well, what's the end? If I asked you a question, what is the end? What is the sign of your coming in the end of the age? What is the end of the age? What event is there at the end of the age?
You're coming.
His coming, right. That's the question. What is the sign of your coming in the end of the age? Well, the sign of his coming is events that leads up to that, so that we have some warning. That's what we need. That's what prophecy is. It's a warning of a big event. That's what prophecy's for. That's why he gave us the warning of the time of the end, so that we can prepare. We can prepare 3 different ways. We can prepare spiritually, which is ultimately the most important way to prepare. We can prepare mentally for what's coming, a time of trouble such as there never was. We need to be mentally prepared for that so that we're ready for it. But we can also be, what a lot of people leave off, we can actually be physically prepared as well. And so we can prepare a little bit physically for what's coming. I can prepare for an earthquake by securing my hot water tank. because they tell you that. If you go to earthquake preparedness or disaster preparedness seminars, that's one of the things they tell you to do. Get extra water, make sure you got some fresh water on hand. Oh, by the way, you can secure your hot water tank, because if that tips over, your water lines are probably going to break. You're going to have water all over the place. You know, there's little things that you can do. You might want to have possibly a generator, maybe a little bit of gas. You know, you might want to have a 45-gallon drum of gas. And yeah, that's
I
not
thought
going
you were
to
going to
last
say a
you.
45 caliber.
45 caliber. Well, if you're in a place where you can have a 45 caliber, you might want to have a 45 caliber. But yeah, so there's physical preparation that we can make, even if it's the most basic preparation. And I believe that's why God gives us a heads up, so that we can make a little bit of physical preparation for this time. Judy tells me that her mother, I think it's your mother or father, used to say, pardon me?
It was Mom. I know what you're going to say. You're talking about the gas tank?
Go ahead and say it.
Mom always said, if you can afford the initial investment, it doesn't cost you any more to drive on the top half of your gas tank than the bottom half. So she always filled up at half a tank. And I always filled up every Friday afternoon, even if I was down to, only used a quarter tank that week.
You know, especially people that live down in the lower mainland, that's on the coast of British Columbia. I mean, they've been rocking and rolling down there. You know, that's the big one. The California fault line comes right up through and runs up through Alaska, and actually runs across the those islands. What are those islands called up there? The Aleutian Islands that kind of make a bridge across, the jumping bridge across to Russia, and it runs all the way down Japan and all the way down into the Philippines and Indonesia, and it's called the Ring of Fire. I was watching something earlier on that. It's actually technically the horseshoe of fire. It's not a complete circle, but it runs like tens of thousands of miles long. It's amazing how it's called the Ring of Fire. It's volcanoes all the way along. And they've had 3 earthquakes on the west coast of British Columbia just within the last few weeks. And so that thing could go at any time. They're always waiting for the big one. But I recommend for people that live on the coast, make sure your gas tank is on the high end of you just don't know when you're going to have to get out of Vancouver. And it's not like we live in fear. It's just we're ready. It's like, just be ready. And so it's the physical preparation that I tell people. And I get a lot of recoil on that. Oh, we don't have to prepare. Well, I don't know. If you look in the Old Testament, prophecy was given to God's people so that they could prepare for what was coming. And even the king of Assyria was going to attack Israel here and there, all over the place. And God revealed through his prophet, I think it was Elisha, that where the king of Assyria was going to have his army, and Israel avoided those places. And they had a heads up every time that Assyria was going to attack. And it's they made physical preparation and removed themselves from where the problems were going to be. And that I think what prophecy for the most part in the time of the end is all about, or a great deal of it. Okay, so let's pick it up in Matthew chapter 24, verse 6 through 8.
And he shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, and pestilence, and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows.
Okay, so that's the part I wanted to get to. All these are the beginning of sorrows or the beginning of troubles. And of course, we know that that is in reference to birth pains. And any woman that's had birth pains or any man that's gone in and watched their wife have birth pains knows exactly what this is talking about. And birth pains, they're erratic, called the Braxton Hicks, I believe, if I remember correctly. And they get stronger, more concentrated, and then they get closer together, and pretty soon it's like, what is it, every 30 seconds or something like that when they're, and so that's when you want to, for men, that's when they leave the room. But anyways, that's when the contractions get full on hard, they're regular, they're you can actually set your clock by them, and you know when the next one's coming. And that's what Yeshua referred to, and that's amazing. So he refers to an experience that every woman understands, for the most part, every woman understands. And so we understand, especially in the time of the end. I understand what Yeshua is talking about. He's saying that wars, earthquakes, natural disasters are going to intensify. They're going to get more regular as it goes. And this is how the time of the end begins. Wars, rumors of wars, it's going to get more intense. They're going to get more kind of all over the place. There's going to be lots of rumors, lots of wars. Does this sound like the news today? Anybody watch the news today?
Yes.
I mean, we got wars brewing in the Middle East. We got Europe now is talking about, France is talking about, backing Ukraine up with nuclear weapons. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm glad he brought that into the equation. The UK is talking about the same sort of thing. Italy is saying, no, we're not in on this one. You guys are going to have to go alone. Well, Europe is in turmoil because of this Ukraine thing, Russia. So now, if you want to look at a map of the world, that's like half the world just on that continent. And now throw China into the mix with Taiwan. Okay, that's the whole of the Asian continent, including Europe, Eurasian continent. That's that whole thing is stirred in the spirit of war. And now you've got a war happening between the United States and Canada. Wow. We've got Canadians that are worried that Trump's going to invade Canada and set up martial law all in the streets of Canada. And I'm just chuckling. It's hilarious. And why is it? Because these people do not know what the Bible says. And that's why. They have no clue what's going on because they don't know what the word of Jehovah says. So we've got the whole world now stirring with war. And Canada, not that that's really going to happen, except Canada is involved in the Ukrainian war, fully involved in that war. And also the United States has been in the last little while. So the whole world, all the major countries in the world are involved in war. Well, that's kind of interesting because Yeshua said that's the first thing you're going to be looking at. So this now is what people are looking at. And so now everyone's trying to find in the Bible the wars that Yeshua is talking about. Well, we have full-scale wars and rumors of wars coming. So that's
trade wars too.
Trade wars, absolutely. I mean, it's the war of the 21st century now, trade wars, because it's, what do they call that? It's not a kinetic war. Kinetic war would be in motion, bullets flying. But these are different. It's the way China has a philosophy on war. And if you can take over nations without shooting any bullets, that's the way to go. And that's what they've tried to do with the United States and Canada, is take over the United States through through getting in there at government levels and buying land, buying large swaths of land, and so on. So that's how they're trying to do it. So now we see here, it says that all these things are the beginning of sorrows. So now we want to go to Luke. Matthew and Mark are the same, so we're not going to take the time to go to Mark. Basically, it says the same thing. But I want to look at Luke because he adds a little information that I believe is very important. Luke chapter 21, and now go back to verse 9.
But when ye shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified, for these things must first come to pass, but the end is not by and by. Then said he unto them, Nations shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdoms, and great earthquakes shall be in the divers places, and famines and pestilence and fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven. But behold, all these, they shall lay their hands on you, and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and into prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake.
Okay, but it will turn out for you as an occasion for testimony. So let's back up let's look at verse 9 through 11. So he says, but when you hear of wars and commotions, now that wars and commotions are not the same thing. Wars are wars between kingdom and kingdom, but commotions, for the most part, are referring to civil unrest, wars within nations. So we're going to see not only nation against nation, but Luke adds another aspect of this. We're going to see civil unrest within nations. And this is what we're seeing as well. And it's going to grow. That part is going to grow as well. So then he says, the next thing in this verse, he says, for these things must come to pass first. That's the key. So let's go back to the question. What is the sign of your coming in the end of the age? Then he talks about deception, and then he goes to the event. The first event is war. War takes us down the spiral at the time of the end. So the beginning movements at the time of the end, the onset is because of war. What does war do? It causes lots of problems within nations. It's going to cause famine. It's going to cause pestilence, and all these things that follow on its heels. So this tells us the magnitude of the war, the severity of the war, that all these things are going to fall on the heels of this war. So he says this is going to be the first thing that's going to happen. So the question is, what war is going to take us into the final phase of this? So people are asking, what's going on in Israel? Is this the war that's shaping up with Hamas? Is this the war that's going to take us into the time of the end? Well, yes, this is the war, but it's not going to happen the way people are thinking it's going to happen. And why is that? Because they're looking for the answers in the wrong place. And let me further explain that. So let's go back to Matthew now. And I'm spending a lot of time between these chapters because if we're going to share this with people, this is really where I believe that we need to start. And you're going to see exactly why when we get here in a few more verses. So we are now on verse 9.
Matthew 24. Okay, 9.
Yes, 9 through 14.
Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come.
Okay.
This is King James.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So now he goes through a few more events. He's talking about persecution. Many people will be offended. They'll betray one another. So what's going to happen is people that are in the faith, because of persecution, they will leave the faith, and then they will betray others that are in the faith. And this is not a very pretty thing that's going on here. And then many false prophets. I would propose that these false prophets, he says, are deceiving many. Those are the same ones that are teaching in his name.
I just clicked on the Hebrew word that's offended, because usually you think, oh, well, I'm offended at something. You're thinking of it in that terms. But the word actually, it's the Greek word that scandalizo, like scandalize. It means to entrap or to trip up, to stumble, to entice to sin, apostasy or displeasure. So those that will be offended, what many shall be enticed to sin, many shall apostatize, is actually what it's saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many, because lawlessness will abound. The love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end, I don't want to take time, those are important things, but for the sake of what we're actually looking at here, this gospel, I want to focus in on verse 14 and 15. And this gospel of the kingdom do we have the gospel of the kingdom straight?
Yes.
Oh, you might think you have it straight, and I think you do, but do we have it straight? Because this is what Yeshua said that is being taught in the time of the end. The gospel of the kingdom. Now, if I was to ask your average messianic believer of what his view of the gospel of the kingdom is, what do you suppose the answer would be?
The millennium.
The millennium on earth. Yeshua's coming back to reign, and we're going to reign with him for 1,000 years. That's what they're teaching. That's what he said, that the true followers are going to be teaching the gospel of the kingdom. I propose he could have put the true gospel of the kingdom there, and it wouldn't be distorting what he said. Obviously, his followers are going to be teaching the gospel of the kingdom, the true gospel of the kingdom. I propose that those false prophets are teaching a different gospel of the kingdom. Now, there's going to be some people that don't like that, for me to say that. But there are two distinct gospels of the kingdom. One of the gospels of the kingdom has Yeshua returning to earth to set up his kingdom. Well, let's talk about who believes that. The Christians believe that. The Sunday-keeping Christians believe that. The Islamists believe that, at least to a degree. They believe that Yeshua is coming back. And that's not a negative thing for Muslims. And the Israelite people believe that the Messiah is coming back. The Messianic believers believe the Messiah is coming back to reign here on earth. The Jews call it the Messianic age. The Messianic believers call it the Messianic age as well. Interesting, they both have the same name for that time period. But guess what? They all believe Yeshua is coming back to reign on earth for the 1,000-year millennium on earth. That in and of itself should be a warning for us that it might not be true. I think that's a very good indication that we need to seriously look at that doctrine. But those that are teaching that the gospel of the kingdom is going to be held in the kingdom of heaven and not on earth, those are the ones that are going to be taking the heat in the time of the end, because they're teaching a different gospel than everyone else. Surprise, surprise. Okay, so the next thing, when this gospel is taught in all the world, he says, then the end will come. Then Yeshua will return. Because everyone at that point has had an opportunity to accept that gospel. They will either have accepted or rejected it, and at that point, every decision for eternity will be made, and it will be that time that Yeshua will return and receive those that have accepted his gospel. Verse 15. Now we do what's called, what I've come to understand as a repeat and enlarge. Yeshua gives us, in brief, all the events that lead up to his second coming, and then he goes back into the prophecy, and he says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. So the very interesting thing, now we've got, this is inserted into some point in the prophecy that we just read, from verse 4 through to verse 15, or verse 14 at the end. So we've got all the signs of the events that are going to happen prior to Yeshua's coming. And then he says, oh, by the way, when you see this, so this event here, this abomination of desolation event, is during the time up until verse 14. So we have to fit it somewhere in this prophecy. So the question is, where does it fit? Does it fit between verse 5 and 6, or between 8 and 9? So I'm not asking where it fits, but I'm saying it fits somewhere in between these verses. So how do we find out where it fits? What would you do?
After the daily's taken away.
We'll go to the book of Daniel.
Nice. That's the answer. And you answered the question too, Darla, except you weren't specific. The daily being taken away. Well, do we go to Isaiah to find out when the daily's taken away?
Oh, Daniel.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Do we go to Jeremiah? Do we go to Ezekiel?
No.
No, why not?
That's not what Yeshua said.
Thank you. That's not the direction that Yeshua pointed us in. It's really just that simple. It is that simple. Yeshua gave us a signpost. He said the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet. He didn't stop there. He said, whoever reads, let him understand. So my question is to people that ask me about this, so what is the daily anyways? Because according to Yeshua, we need to understand what it is. We don't only need to know what the abomination of desolation is, but if we don't know what the daily is, we're not going to get the abomination of desolation right. So they're intrinsically connected to the point where we can't have one without the other. So if we think we got the abomination of desolation worked out, then we should know what the daily is. We can't have one without the other. So Yeshua said we need to understand. Well, the next verse, verse 16, is a geographical fix of where the daily is going to be taken away. It's in Judea. Wow. It's not in Arkansas, or it's not in, Australia. Sorry, Dale. It's not going to be in Australia. It's going to be in the Middle East, specifically in Judea, where Jerusalem is. And so we know that this abomination is going to be set up in Israel. And once we start reading other prophecies, we can see very clearly that there's something big going to be going on in Israel in the time of the end. And that's where Yeshua focuses. So now I'm going to show you what I did when I first started looking at this stuff, and it helped me tremendously. So if we're going to do what Yeshua said, we got to go back to Daniel. And we know that if we go to the last book of Daniel, the last chapter of Daniel, he talks about the daily being taken away and the abomination of desolation set up. So let's look in chapter 12 of Daniel and verse 11. Actually, let's pick it up. Let's pick it up in verse 4. Let's pick it up in verse 4. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book. Not the chapter, not chapter 12 of Daniel, but seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. I propose that when Yeshua was asked about the time of the end, he went back to Daniel because he knew the book of Daniel contained events that were going to happen in the time of the end. How did he know that? He was a student of the book of Daniel. And he understood the book of Daniel, and I do believe that he actually found himself in the fiery furnace in the book of Daniel. He was very well acquainted in the book of Daniel. And so when he was asked about the signs of his coming in the end of the age, he goes to the book of Daniel. That's where we should go. So then he says, talking about the abomination of desolation, verse 11. And from the time that the daily is taken away and the abomination of desolation set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Okay, so there's a timetable attached to the time of the end, and it's 1,290 days. Does anyone's Bible say years there?
Nope.
So, do you think we should just take it for days then? Or does somebody want to turn this into years?
No.
Okay, so let's just take it for what it says.
We've been here too long.
And that would be a pretty long suffering time if it went years.
Okay, so the abomination of desolation is going to happen where?
In the holy place.
In the holy place, more specifically.
Judea.
In Judea. Not in Paris. Not in France somewhere. Okay, for those that think that France had anything to do with the abomination of desolation, couldn't be farther geographically from the fix that Yeshua gave us. So we know here that the daily is something to do with the temple in Jerusalem and the sacrificial system. Not going to get into that part of it right now. But here's the deal. So we know that the abomination of desolation is found in the book of Daniel. Is it found anywhere else in the book of Daniel? Well, let's go back. Let's go back in time, and we can see in verse 31 in the chapter 11 of the book of Daniel, it says in the book of Daniel in chapter 11, verse 31, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress, and they shall take away the daily sacrifices, and place there the abomination of desolation. So now it says that forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Wow. What's that talking about? So we've just gone from what Yeshua said, we've gone back into the book of Daniel, where he says we need to understand this, the abomination of desolation, and we've gone backwards now, and now it talks about the abomination of desolation and the taking away of the daily at a sanctuary fortress. Where do you suppose this sanctuary fortress is?
The temple.
Exactly. Exactly. Now we can go to the writings of Paul, which we're not going to right now, but 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, that Paul talks about this abomination of desolation. He says he sits as God in the temple of God, declaring himself to be God. That's the abomination of desolation. That's Satan himself, actually, he's referring to. And then we go, if we want to find out more about this abomination of desolation, we can go back to Daniel chapter 8. We find a little more information about this taking away of the daily. But we don't have the words abomination of desolation. But we have similar things. Let's go, somebody want to read chapter 8, verses 9 through 12. Oh, let's actually read 9 through 14.
And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great, toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land.
Whoa, we got to stop there. Where's the pleasant land?
Jerusalem.
Okay, good. The reason why I bring that out, because that's the final destination of this little horn power. He's going to the glorious land. Other translations, mine says the glorious land. And there's no question, if we do a little study on where this is, there's no question, this is in the land of Israel. So that's where this power is going, ultimately. Okay, go ahead.
And it waxed great, even to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the hosts and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered.
So I want a couple more verses here, but before we do, so we don't have anything saying that this is the abomination of desolation, which it isn't. But this is leading up to that point, okay? So this is the little horn power that's leading up to that point. We've got Jerusalem in focus again. We've got a temple in focus again. And so let's keep going, shall we? Verse 13 and 14.
Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto the certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. My margin says evenings and mornings.
Right. So we've got a time period there in connection with this prophecy, this part of the prophecy. The question's asked, how long will this little horn do its thing? And then the answer comes back, 2300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. So this is in reference to the sanctuary. It's not necessarily in reference to the Genesis, you know, the evening and the morning were the first day, the evening and the morning were the second day, and so on. This is in relation to evenings and mornings in regard to the sanctuary. This is where the mistakes are made. When we're talking about evenings and mornings in connection with the sanctuary, it's in regard to the offerings, the evening and morning offerings. That's why the translators put in the word sacrifice there when it's in regard to the daily. It says the daily sacrifices. That was to help us in the way we interpret this. You don't need to have that word there. It still is the same thing. The daily is the daily. It doesn't matter whether you add sacrifice to it or not. You can have a daily sacrifice period without sacrificing an animal. And I think that Daniel was very familiar with that when he was in captivity. He was not sacrificing animals, but he was keeping his daily appointment with his God. And that's quite evident when we get to chapter 6 of Daniel, that he's doing that. So Daniel did not need to add that. It's not necessary to be in there. But the clue is, this is the interesting part, the clue is that the little horn is going to end up in a temple in Jerusalem, and he's going to cause the sacrificial system to stop. And we see that in this time period here. And if you want to make a little note here, Revelation chapter 11, verses 1 through 3 are more evidence of that. It says, arise and measure the temple. So that's in connection with judgment, which is in connection with cleansing the sanctuary. It says, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed in verse 14, or made right, or justified. And when we look at the sanctuary system, that happened on the Day of Atonement, and that was judgment. That's when the sanctuary was cleansed of all the record of sins that had been brought in throughout the year. That was what the Day of Atonement was all for. And then Israel started all over again. Everyone was cleansed from all their acts that they had committed. The record of sins was gone. And that, of course, is leading us up until the final cleansing in the heavenly sanctuary, which is a topic for another day. So here we have a time period connected to the cleansing of the sanctuary in the future that is ahead of us when the little horn reigns out of Jerusalem. Now I want to look at something here in verse 13 just to make the point, because this is what people miss. People that apply this historically in history take these prophecies and put them in the past. When we look at them carefully, we can see, no, they were not fulfilled in the past. So let's look at verse 13 here to bring out a point. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation, the giving both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And then he gives this time period. And if we connect that back up to verse 11, it says, and he even exalts himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Now, I propose that the place of his sanctuary is his heavenly sanctuary, where the heavenly Jerusalem is. We read about that in chapter 12 of Hebrews. But also the place of the earthly sanctuary is cast down as well, giving us a geographical fix here on earth. Now, I want to go to Revelation chapter 11 to connect the dot here. It says here, "Then I was given a reed like a measuring rod," referring to judgment, "and the angel stood, saying, 'Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those that worship there. But leave out the court, which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the holy city.'" Geographical fix. Where's the holy city? Jerusalem. "They will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth." Now, for those that want to take this and put it in history, you can't do that. Let's go up to verse 8 to give us our geographical fix of where Yeshua pointed us to. It says, "And their dead bodies," these are the 2 witnesses now, "and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city," that's Jerusalem, the city of the great king, "which is spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt." We go back to Isaiah to find out. Jerusalem was referred to when they were in apostasy as Sodom. And it says, "where also our Lord was crucified." So where was Yeshua crucified? In Jerusalem. So there's no question about the geographical location that we're in the time of the end. For those that want to stick to the historical application, you're losing a lot of ground, because if you look at it as far as an end time scenario, you're going to get a lot more events and details about what's happening here today. So, now I want to go back to chapter 8 of Daniel. So when we go back to Daniel chapter 8, and we connect it to what Yeshua spoke about what Daniel spoke about, we're backing up in the book of Daniel. This is the trick that I learned so many years ago that has really helped me a lot. So I went and found the Abomination of Desolation. Then I started backing up, because I believe the Abomination of Desolation is an event at the time of the end. So I find the prophecies that deal with the abomination and the events, and then I just start backing up in those prophecies, and I try and put my finger on where I am today. So this is what we're going to do in Daniel chapter 8. I propose Daniel 9 is talking about a little horn.
No, not Daniel 9.
Daniel chapter 8, verse 9. Sorry, Daniel chapter 8, verse 9 says, "Out of one of them came a little horn that grows exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land." Well, the little horn has not grown exceedingly great toward the glorious land as yet. That hasn't happened, so I'm backing up. So has it grown to the south or to the east? I propose no, it hasn't. Those are going to be results from something that's going to happen. So now we've got to back up in the prophecy a little bit more. So let's read verse 8. "Therefore the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven." So what is this talking about? Well, here again, those people that want to adhere to the historical application of prophecy, you're missing out on really what it's talking about. This is talking about events in the time of the end. So who is the goat? What is the goat that it's talking about here? I propose the goat is a large entity that's made up of many kingdoms. But here it's talking about 4 main kingdoms, 4 notable kingdoms that are involved in leading the goat. And they are the ones that take control of the goat. So if the goat's made up of many kingdoms, and there's 4 main kingdoms that lead the goat, if we're looking at kingdoms today that are the most powerful nations in the world, who might they be? Well, we're going to give you a little help here because you probably have an idea. But we have a structure called the United Nations. The United Nations is led by 5 nations. They're the permanent members on the Security Council of the United Nations. They are the nations that basically run the world. Who are they? The UK, France, Russia, China, and the United States. No one would dispute they're the most powerful nations in the world. All those nations have nuclear weapons. They are the most powerful. Why are they the most powerful? Because they are the victors of the Second World War. That's when the United Nations was created. It was created by those 5 giants because they won the war. And they became the most powerful nations in the world. Why did they become the most powerful nations in the world? Because they stacked the deck. They created the entity that they would always remain the most powerful nations in the world. That's a nice deck that they stacked. And so they're always going to come out on top. So this is, I believe, what it's talking about. The goat is the United Nations that's led by these 4 nations. Well, what happened to the 5th one that I just mentioned? Well, let's back up some more in the prophecy. Chapter 8 of Daniel, verse 5 through 7.
And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his 2 horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand.
So let's just look at what we just read there, because this is so vitally important. So what we've done here, we've done exactly what Yeshua said. He was asked the question, what is the sign of your coming in the end of the age? And then he says, you know what? You want more information on this? Go back to Daniel. So we're sitting here, which we believe we're in the time of the end. So we should be doing what Yeshua says. Go back to Daniel, see if you can find out what's going on. Well, we found exactly what he was talking about. So if we take these prophecies, and what we've just done, is we've gone backwards to figure out where we are in this prophecy, because we should be able to put our finger, oh, we're between verse 5 and 6, or we're between 10 and 12. We should be able to figure out where we're at. So what we've just done here is we've backed up in this prophecy, and we could go and do this in much more detail, but for the sake of time. So I want to really look carefully at what we just read here, because this is where the historicist view of prophecy goes sideways. They miss everything. I believe, I've come to the conclusion that the events connected with things that are going to happen up until the second coming are actually clearly in the prophecies. When we start to put all these prophecies together, we're getting incredible detail on what's going on. We need not be surprised by anything that's going on. And I take that to the simplest thing, that Canada is not going to be taken over by the United States. They're going to join the United States in creating a beast power, but they're going to remain 2 separate kingdoms. Why do I say that? Because prophecy says that. Revelation 13 says that very thing. There's a second beast that rises up out of the earth that has two horns. And somebody says, well, how do you know that's the United States and Canada? Give me another hour and I'll help you understand that. We're not going to look at that right now. But the fact is, Canada and the United States are going to work extremely close together in the future because of necessity.
I'll just say, if they want the details, look for our video called The Beast of the Mark.
Okay. Okay, so let's look at these verses here. Verse 5. We're going to start at verse 5. We haven't finished backing up yet. We're going to back up still some more. And as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth. So if these prophecies are talking about the time of the end, and they're for us, then what would it mean for a power to come across the surface of the whole earth? What would that mean geographically for us? And I'm open to some ideas here.
Submarine.
Submarine.
You can fly.
Well, if you're a historicist, I don't think they had submarines back then in the time of Alexander the Great, did they?
No.
Okay, I'm looking for.
Put something across the.
You'd have to fly from the United States across the water.
Right. Okay. So yeah, that's my point. That's my point. If I'm sitting here at the time of the end and I'm looking at these prophecies and I'm trying to take them for what they say, it says that there's a beast power, a goat, that comes across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. Well, if this prophecy is for the time of the end, how could this possibly be talking about a power that comes from halfway across the Mediterranean and goes to war? Like, it just doesn't work. And so I know people are going to say, well, it's not talking about the time of the end. Well, it is actually talking about the time of the end. So at the time of the end, there's going to be a power that comes from the west across the surface of the whole earth, not part way, but the whole earth, without touching the ground. Well, if we're putting an end time application on this, that has to be the United States that's involved. How is the goat involved? And how is the UN involved? Well, in New York is the headquarters for the UN. That's where it was set up after the Second World War. That's when they created the UN, and they donated this land for the UN. And so the UN is actually, the main headquarters is in New York. Now they have, in Geneva, I believe, is another UN headquarters, but that's in Europe. So if the United States is this notable horn, as we read, without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between its eyes. In other words, a horn or a kingdom that was leading the charge. It was out front. It was the one that was noticeable. Notable horn. But we see in verse 8 that there are other horns as well. Why doesn't it pick up on that? Because it's picking up here that there's a notable horn that leads the charge. And the other horns are there, they're in the background, but there's a notable horn that leads the charge. It says, then he came to the ram, not the notable horn, but the goat. So we've got the UN involved here. It comes to the ram that had two horns that I'd seen standing beside the river, ran at him with furious power. So there's something that the ram, who we don't know who is at this point, does that raises the ire of the UN, or the 5 notable kingdoms in the UN. Who are those? That's the UK, France, Russia, and China, and the United States. So we need to get to the bottom of that. So I saw him confronting the ram, moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, broke his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him. and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Now, if we go up a little bit more to figure out what leads up to this, we start in verse 1.
In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai. Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there standing beside the river was a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his will and became great.
Okay, so this ram has 2 horns. Now, if we jump up to verse 20, we find out that the ram which you saw having 2 horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. So if you want to just go to my slide there, Judy. At the time of the Medo-Persian Empire, when it became its height around 500 BC, which is not too long after Daniel had this vision, this is the area that the Medes and the Persians controlled, and ultimately it became known as the Persian Empire. So these are the kings that it's talking about. Now we can just say, well, it's talking about those kings, but really, if we overlay where Daniel had the vision, I've got it circled there, that's where he had that little river there off to the right hand of your screen. That would be, I've had to draw that in. That's the river Ulai. That's where it's believed that the river Ulai was. You can't find it on a map, but the best guess is it's pretty close to Susa, and that's probably where Daniel was at the time. So he was taken in vision to the river, and that's where he saw this vision. Well, when we compare this vision with Daniel chapter 11, Daniel 10 through 11, he has a vision there as well, and it's by the great river that is the Tigris, he calls that. Well, that's the other river there that leads into the Persian Gulf, the Euphrates and the Tigris. So that's where he has that vision. And it's interesting when we compare Daniel 8 and Daniel 11, which is where we started from Daniel 12. Daniel 11 is where we saw the abomination of desolation. That's where another clue is about the abomination of desolation. And then we find out here in Daniel 8, he has a vision that's in the same location. And so we can see here that he's talking about this same location and this power. So now, if we take that in as far as end time is concerned, we can overlay the kings of Media and Persia pretty much exactly where the kings of Media and Persia was in Daniel's day. That refers to the time of the end. So these are the kingdoms that are going to square off with the West and the UN, the 5 major powers in the time of the end. Now, let's bring some context into this. How is it that China is going to join forces with us and fight Islam? How is Russia going to do that? How is the UK going to do that? How is France going to do that? How is Europe going to do that? Well, the end game for Islam is to rule the world. Now, we can see the Islamic world is at kind of a lot of unrest in what's going on. what we see in Israel right now, what's going on with Gaza and the Palestinians, this is actually uniting the Arab world today. So we don't know how fast this is going to happen, but we see this on the horizon. Now, if we want a few more details, we have to do a little more homework and go a little further down the road in the book of Daniel. Let's go to Daniel chapter 11. Daniel chapter 11 is the same events, same prophecy, just much more information. It's that repeat and enlarge. So if we want more details, we've got to move over into another prophecy and get those extra details. So now in chapter 11, and maybe just hold your finger there, I'm just going to go back to Daniel chapter 10, because that's the beginning. And I want to pick it up on verse 4, just so we can connect the dots here. Daniel 10, verse 4 says, "Now on the 24th day of the first month, as I was by the side of the great river, that is the Tigris." So that's giving us a geographical fix here of where he had the vision. Now in verse 14 of chapter 10, it says, "Now I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision refers to many days yet to come." So here we have a time context and a geographical fix as well.
I just want to interject real quickly. King James says the river Hiddekel, but when you click on the word, that's the Hebrew name, and it is better known as the Tigris when you look in the definition. So don't let it throw you if you saw a different river name there.
Okay. So then when we get to Daniel chapter 11, now he's going to get the truth. He says in verse 2, it picks it up here. "Now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and a fourth shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece." And of course, this word Greece has led many people to think this is talking about Alexander the Great, but it actually is the word Javan. And when we go back to Genesis, we go back well before Alexander the Great, and we find out that Javan was the father of all those nations that went west after the flood. And that would take in Europe, even parts, it's believed even some of the people in Russia, but primarily the people of the West. And that's where we see this power comes from the West across the surface of the whole earth. So we here in North America are peoples from the seed of Javan. Really, that's where we come from. And so at the time of the end, the seed of Javan comes from the West across the surface of the whole earth. These are the ones that are leading the charge, and they make war against these kingdoms. Can we see that on the horizon? Do we see the possibility of a war that's led by the West against the Islamic nations? I mean, that's like a no-brainer, right? Why are we squaring off with them? The reason is because the Islamic nations believe they're going to rule the world. And Sharia law is going to have supremacy in the world. That means, Lynn, you better find your burqa because you're going to need it. I say that jokingly, but the West is not going to put up with that. It's just not. There's no way. And so we're on a head-on collision. The West, which will be led by Christianity, we're looking for the modern crusades, is really what this is going to turn into. It's going to be the West led by the United States, and Europe will be involved. UK is going to be involved. Russia is going to be involved. We're all going to join forces because we have a common enemy in Islam that's going to make its move on the world. It says here in Daniel 8 that they do according to their own will. They do whatever they want. And when we look at the map here, we have some more detail that we're given in Daniel 11. It says 3 more will join forces. So we're going to see a uniting in the Arab world. And it says one is far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he will stir up all of the ram against the West, against the Western nations, against Christianity. Who would that entity be? If you looked at all these nations, which is the richest nation in the Middle East?
Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely. It has to be Saudi Arabia. So now what we're looking at is when Saudi Arabia goes against the West, according to the prophecy, showdown is coming very soon. So this is what we're watching for. So when people are really losing their mind and saying, you know, Gog, Magog, no, let's do what Yeshua said. Let's go back to Daniel, try and figure it out what's going on in the book of Daniel. And Yeshua said, war is going to begin the time of the end. It's this war, not any old war. It's this war. When the UN, when the major forces in the UN, namely China, Russia, France, the EU, UK, and the United States, join forces against Islam, that's the beginning of the end. So is this thing in Gaza going to turn into this war? Maybe. But what we're looking at is, what is Saudi Arabia doing? If Saudi Arabia is not in on this, then it's not going to happen. It's just that simple. Saudi Arabia is the major player in all of this, and they need to be on board. And when they get on board, we know that showdown is just around the corner, because it says that 3 more kings will arise in Persia, this whole empire. A fourth shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. That's going to be go time for the Islamic world to take over the world. And the UN, that's led by these nations, is going to say no. It's not going to happen. And it says, a mighty king shall arise, do according to, and shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. Who's this? That's the notable horn back in Daniel 8. Let's go back to Daniel 8 now. It says, Daniel 8 verse 5, and as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth. That's the UN United Forces, these 5 notable kingdoms of the UN. Without touching the ground, the goat had a notable horn. That would be this mighty king talked about in Daniel chapter 11. That I believe to be none other than Donald Trump. That's where I see him in these prophecies. He's the mighty king in Daniel 11 that's going to do according to his will. Has anyone been watching the news lately? Is there a mighty king that's doing according to his will?
Yeah.
I mean, he's got the whole world ticked off at him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Nobody
he is
can
doing
stop
what
him.
he wants to do. And, you know, I don't know if I should say this, but I'll say that. He's the only thinking person in the room, really. He knows what's coming. His administration knows that this war is on the horizon. And that's why he's so adamant that we are supporting Israel in this, because the people that he has chosen to be in his cabinet knows the end game of Islam. They know it. I've heard them talk about it. One of them, I believe it was Tulsi Gabbard, said there's no such thing as a moderate Islamist. They don't exist. They're all radical. Anybody that is really a believer of Islam has an end game. And the end game is to rule the world. And Allah will rule supreme, and Sharia law will be had by all. And you know, it's interesting as I've been watching the news lately, these crazy people in the world, these new world order people in the world, you know, Macron, the guy in UK, and all these people, were all excited that these people were going into Syria and we've toppled the Assad regime. Well, the latest that I'm looking on the news is this new power that's got into Syria. They've just slaughtered about 17,000 people, and Christians have been among those people. So every time they turn around, they make the wrong move. They don't understand, because they don't understand what's going on here. The Islamists are all bad. I'm sorry, they're all bad. There's not a good one on the planet. If they're serious about the religion, they are going to take over the world, so they think. But it's not going to happen according to the prophecies. They're going to be defeated. It says here in verse 7, it says, "And I saw him confronting the ram," I'm in Daniel chapter 8. "He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, broke his two horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground, trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand." So the ram, Islam, is completely annihilated as a religion in the world. You see, it's after this that we move to a one-world religion. And the reason why we're moving to a one-world religion is because of the war that we just went through from a religion that wanted to take over the world. And the world is going to make an agreement, is there's not going to be any more different religions. We're going to have a state-approved religion, and ultimately that's where we're going. It's down the road, but that is where we're going, because that's what prophecy teaches. Let's sum this up. So the war in the Middle East, we're watching the Arab world, what's going on, particularly Saudi Arabia. If Saudi Arabia is not going to go against the West in all of this, if they're going to come to some agreement with Donald Trump and his administration, then it's not going to happen. Not yet. But it's coming soon. It's definitely coming soon. So the war in Ukraine has to be brought under control. If we're going to team up with Russia, which is exactly what Trump is doing, everyone's all upset. Oh, Trump's, Putin is his friend. Donald Trump understands the problems that are coming. That's why he wants Vladimir Putin on his team. But he wants Europe on his team too, and he wants the UK on his team too, because he knows that the whole world is under an Islamic threat. We got to get rid of this Ukraine craziness that's going on, because we got bigger and better problems down the road. And that's what Donald Trump understands.
Father, we just thank you for the teachings that you guide us tonight. We ask you to open our minds that we'll be able to take it in piece by piece. We just pray for our president, for our nation. We pray for the peace of the world. Amen.